everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Estranged. Super excited today to have a new guest, Creston Davis, who is the founder and CEO of GCAS, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it sounds a big, heavy duty stuff, but yeah, that's more or less right.
It's a very
formal.
What's the word, clear name.
It's very pretentious. It's not like Oxford or like Elon or like Wesleyan. It's just like straight up, like American style, like no fluff.
I like it. I mean, you might as well just state it as it is. And with various degrees from various institutions like Yale, Oxford, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you went to Cambridge, so we have to sort of revisit that rivalry. Maybe, I don't know, but it seems, I don't know, not so.
We all know which university is the best.
Advantageous.
Even though I really don't give a shit, but
there is this ongoing debate, like who's older, Oxford or Cambridge?
Yeah.
And it depends on how you clarify that. But anyway.
Oh, really? Yeah. No, I'm in Belfast currently, and I was just driving through Belfast today in this like really random area in East Belfast, and which is like marginally notorious, let's just say. And there was a guy walking around with a Cambridge Blues blazer, like a sporting blazer. And I was like, what the hell? What? It's like the most incongruous place to be wearing that. But Cambridge. Yeah. All the way.
Oh my God. Well, I should say, I actually didn't graduate from Oxford. I was just there as a student. And then I ended up going back to the States after I got a bit sick. And then, so I was going to I got into Yale, but Calvin College offered me a full scholarship. And so I went there. Now, I'm not happy about that necessarily now, but okay.
Yeah.
But you're in Belfast. Is that what you call home, more or less, for you these days?
That's a complicated one. Strangely enough, actually, I may have mentioned this on a previous podcast, not that people really care about my own life, but this is like at the age of 31, like amongst the top 3 longest stints I've been at home since the age of 7.
What is it now? 3 months, 4 months?
5 months. 5 months.
Okay.
I don't think I've maybe 1 or 2 times longer than that since, in 24 years because of the parents' jobs and where I went to school and everything. So it is really weird. It's this really weird, like regression session. Let's just
totally. Well, you are really nomadic, and actually both of us travel quite a bit. And being here and during lockdown from March on, I came back from London in end of February, and I've been more or less here with a couple of travels to Paris on occasion. But yeah, I mean, it's strange because I'm used to just being on the move all the time, and I'm not able to be. So.
And your base is quite rural, isn't it?
It's in the middle of nowhere. Like I ride my bike to the store once a week to get like wine and cheese.
So obviously France.
Yeah, it's in France. Yeah, east of Bordeaux, near Bergerac, which is where Jean-Luc Nancy grew up, in Bergerac.
Oh, interesting.
Have you ever been to this part of France? I know you've been to France.
I must have at some stage. But
it's pretty.
Yeah, I think
it's got caves that are like 17,000 years old with artwork in them. It's really quite nice. Yeah.
Is that where the really famous ones are?
Yeah, that's
just
right.
like a famous one. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. No, France is a good spot.
Yeah, it is. I like it so far. Yeah.
How long have you been based there?
A couple years, like on and off. So, but I'm here, and then I go to Ireland, and then I go meet up with investors and students and do projects and workshops at different locations. Awesome. It's really fun. Yeah.
And we should maybe talk a little bit. So the movie we're going to talk about is the world's most upbeat, jovial, encouraging, like escapist movie ever made.
I love it.
Sorry We Missed You by Ken Loach. But before that, maybe we should talk a little bit about what GCAS is, what it does, what the motivation for establishing it was.
Sure. Yeah. So, but my good friends Clayton Crockett, Jeff Robbins, Slavoj Žižek, and I were kind of discussing what would a Frankfurt school look like in the 21st century? And this is like, I got to know Slavoj at the end of the 90s and was writing to him, and we developed this kind of friendship relationship. And through I met Clayton Crockett and Jeff Robbins, who are into radical theology, into the Winkrist, Jack Caputo's side of things in the American context. And so we had a lot in common, and we met in San Antonio and talked about like different projects. And invariably, we would always come after like 3 or 4 drinks, come back to, what would it look like to be able to determine for ourselves, like what kinds of interesting scholarship could be, if not confounded to the traditional like classroom, Ivy Tower, heavy debt, everything's all just over the top, corporatized and so on. What would that look like? And so, we fancied a conversation many times, and eventually, I took it pretty seriously, which is I don't think they were expecting me to take that seriously. But in the end, like I got a couple job offers, and took one at Rollins just because I had 2 kids at the time. My spouse was going through divinity training to be a priest, and she, so we needed money. And in the end, I took the job at Rollins College, which is this like upper middle class, like kind of posh college, liberal arts college in Florida, of all places, and near Disney World. Yeah. And so I took that job and taught classes there, and was promoted to an associate professor after a couple of years. But then I just, at the end, through various life changes, my wife divorced me, various things happened. And it was like, I'm 40 years old. What do I do? What can I do if I'm going to do this for the rest of my life? And, they called that whole thing the golden handcuffs, 10 years golden handcuffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I just thought, I got more possibilities out there than just teaching the same damn classes over and again. So I just thought, I'll propose it to Rollins to see what they think. And they were like, no, it's too much in conflict with what we have going, and they have their brand, and that makes sense. So in the end, I just took out my retirement, threw it all into GCAS, and put it together in 2013. In fact, in a couple of days, we'll be 7 years old. Haha.
Awesome.
So yeah. So
awesome.
It's been pretty cool over time.
Because obviously you touched on the financialization aspect of education. Yeah. And as somebody who has been a classroom teacher in like secondary schools, and like taught in various settings, and obviously been a student, graduate, well, that's a separate thing. I decided to abandon that graduate studies because I kind of it's, why do we do these things? You could psychoanalyze it for like endlessly, but
totally.
Certainly, like the US obviously is notorious for the financialization, the debt burden on students, the kind of like proletarianization of young people before they've even entered the job market. And it has really crept into the UK. I think like I graduated with an amount that's probably half of what contemporary students now are burdened with in the UK.
Yeah.
And then when we think about the changing economy, the fact that, nothing has really been there are philosophers out there thinking about it, but like they're not valued in terms of what are the impacts of this new industrial revolution, tech, the job opportunity. And how many people are going to university? And obviously, there's all the benevolent interpretations of why we encourage so many children to go to university. In the UK, there was a big push under Tony Blair. But obviously the question is like, well, perhaps there were not enough jobs. So they ferried everybody into universities as a Band-Aid solution.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. There's a lot of models out there that kind of try to reflect like the whole debt culture of education and all that. And the UK certainly has taken on a lot of that, like the Thatcher neoliberal, the Reagan style neoliberalization of things, including education. And so, but yeah, it's a pretty big, hefty problem in the U.S. Its average debt is around €40,000 or dollars for a bachelor's degree, and it just goes up astronomically beyond that. And you really do need like a master's degree these days, which is equivalent to like a high school degree from previous generations. And, why is it that's happened. We can create, so, try to explain it somehow. But at the end of the day, like, I find that the whole structure of education is so important. Education is, but the kind of education that's being done is like job training, and
absolutely.
It's not thinking, it's not creating, so it's a whole different
Absolutely.
ballgame.
And, it's as soon as something becomes like, it is like the capitalization of youth, and like education is not about, necessarily anymore learning to think. It's a rat race. It's a rat race from the age of like anytime you have a public exam, and, that's 11 years old in the UK, and determining your future at such a young age. And I have to say, as a teacher, and I was in a school that wasn't overseen by like government regulations and stuff, but like the pressure is immense. The how important it is to the students, how important it is for you to be able to keep your job. There was the school was run by a very well-known headmaster who kind of was involved in like the political aspects of education, and his legacy to the school. And this is part of the reason why I left, is it becomes such a corporatized exercise, and it really detracts. All you need for good education is an engaging, dynamic teacher who loves the subject and is able to communicate that and has a great knowledge of it. And he created, his legacy was this center of excellence, which was a building which was full of these classrooms, which were essentially like police interrogation
Chambers.
suites, where they have, the double-sided mirrors. You have a classroom with like cameras where they film you, and you can look at your teaching, and people observe you that way. I mean, but of course, as soon as money becomes involved, and as soon as something's capitalized on, you get checks and balances and this horrible managerial system. In the UK, the turnover rate of teachers is 50% leaving in the first 2 years of their career.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's pretty rough in the US as well, just teaching wise. And in fact, something that brings us closer to, one of our discussion points today, namely Loach's film, is, just how, the structure of social organization, not just through work, through family, which has to do with the film, but also in education, right? And, I grew up pretty much failing out of high school, and education for me growing up in the context that I did wasn't valued at all. In fact, if you were smart and could read well and could pronounce complicated words with a multiple syllables, you were suspiciously could be gay, right? And growing up in a very homophobic environment, you were like, I'm not going to go there because I don't want to even be, be associated with these kind of denigrating, fascistic kind of belief structures. And, it turns out like, I didn't know I had dyslexia, and I was told, I early on, you take that IQ exam and they pop me into the 3rd grade from kindergarten because, and I come home and I get beat when I get home because they think I'm cheating on a test, and you can't cheat on this test. So turns out like I was just so disenfranchised by the whole schooling structure, brick in the wall, the Pink Floyd thing, and so on, conformity, social conformity, obedience, and so on. But for me, I excelled in athletics, and I was very good, very athletic, like you, running cross country. But in the end, I basically had to beg the principal to graduate me from high school, and I went right off into the Army after that. So
No, it's really interesting because there's what you say about like, I really personally didn't enjoy my experience as a school student. Our mutual friend Peter had a terrible experience. His is almost like the polar opposite of mine. His is a long story, but
I would love to hear
he went to essentially one of the worst schools in the United Kingdom during the Troubles at a time, in a very kind of an area with lots of social challenges. And he just he left school with 1 GCSE, and then it was only subsequently when he was at a technical college doing computer studies that somebody identified that he was smart. But the funny thing is despite all of these bad experiences, it's not like the learning and the knowledge and the content of the education that's the problem. And I remember when I was a teacher, especially, I think it was because it was so stressful. And I'm not into this stuff at all, but I got into quite like Jungian / New Age things. I was into like, I really agreed with the lyrics of like the logical song from Supertramp and everything. But then it's like, but then the thing is, it's like, but I'm not like, I am like a very rational person, and I really enjoy learning and conveying knowledge and like thinking about intellectual things. But it's just the way that the structure within capitalism has developed. It's just like, and there's so many things like that, it gets commodified, it gets.
Absolutely. And you're only considered smart if you or know how to take exams. And that's easily relatable to how your parents prep you for rote memory. And you're basically programmed guinea pigs to do well. And I think the more smarter, clever ones like Pete Rollins, who you were just mentioning, are the ones who don't buy into that. They find it insulting somehow intellectually to even try that, like, trivial, like, is it A, B, C, or D? Like, this is insulting, I think, to a creative mind. And as a result, the whole matrix of understanding and isolating gifted intellectual children, don't match up if they're creative. And the creative mechanisms are the ones that I think, produce and accelerate ideas and innovations and so on. But
and but I really like this idea of like, and yet creating like a university, you know what I mean? It's like, you kind of, as tragic and shitty and like difficult as like the content of the way something is within our contemporary condition, you still have to like fight for that, like, how to do it, something.
Totally. And we face that internal to GCAS. We have like 450 close core members, and we have this debate going on, like, should we even do accreditation, because that requires us to conform to a kind of colonialist structure and of how education is commodified, and ultimately, like, how is it accessible, or how can you evaluate objective learnings, and that top-down model determines the classroom structure, right? And so we have this healthy debate going on, and this is one of the reasons why we have the nonprofit side and the limited side, where we're going to go through the accreditation with one side, but always keep open the experimental side. So it's a kind of a dialectical structure. I don't know.
I don't know who says this. Pete says this a lot. It's like being part of the system but not of it. There's a lot of people who like reject the world entirely, but then, like, what are you going to do? You have to
sit on a telephone,
participate. So you have to participate, like, engage in life, the rough and tumble, like engage with the public, but then not let it completely colonize your very, very being. That's or like destroy you. It's really tricky. But I mean, it's interesting with this film. Obviously, this film touches on subjects of like alienation, exploitation, all these things. And it's like how, through essentially, the technologization of our economy. And it's like, how do we live in this new world? We were talking about Apple products, the pros and mostly cons, just before we started recording. But it's like, how do we use this fact that we have all this amazing technology and all these developments, all these things that we can do within this world where everything has a price tag? And not even that, it's not even like, it's, obviously the traditional criticisms of capitalism is that, it reduces everything to a commodity. Sure. But it's almost like even worse now, because through clever marketing, tech companies have basically managed to prevent anybody from having profits aside from them, because nobody shares in the process of production.
Absolutely.
So it's
and this whole from data, data mining, selling what we like on social media to companies that can target, really advanced marketing targets that come across our screens. This whole mechanism from tech that you're mentioning, alienation, commodification, and the film itself is really good. It's a really amazing, but tragic and sometimes difficult, lots of triggers going on there for people who grew up in working class, super struggling. You can't afford to get sick. Everything's in a precarity that anything goes wrong, it's like a domino effect and it just collapses. and it turns out like I actually did, so the film itself is about this family and working class. The guy's not educated. He's even dug graves. He's done odd jobs to make ends meet. He has a family and he's a good guy. Like he's committed to the family. The spouse is committed. She has an amazing heart of empathy. And the main scene in the family is around the table. It's around food. And there's two children, Liza and Sebastian. And Sebastian's like in his early teens, maybe 14. And I think Liza's a bit younger, maybe 7, 8, 9, something like that. Would you say?
Yeah.
And so you have this family that you can immediately connect with. And the guy is trying to find work. He can't find work. He wants to work on his own. And the trick of capitalism is if you can feel like you have a choice, if you're free to have a choice, then that's a good thing. But it turns out that the choice the guy has is to buy ultimately the choice is fake, right? To buy this van that he needs to invest in to be able to deliver packages on time, directed by speaking of tech, directed by this box, essentially like just GPS super powered machine that can say when a package is delivered, when it's not, and so on. And he's ultimately operating not as a free subject to decide for himself, but determined by a logic that is corporatized, top down. And boy, it's such a struggle. I used to deliver packages. When I had my first child, I dropped out of college in my senior year at Calvin and got married and delivered packages, not at Federal Express, but their competitor at the time was Airborne Express. And I was responsible for delivering packages on the West Coast of Michigan. And for like 4 months, I drove and I did the exact same thing this guy was doing. So there's a lot of like deja vu going on for me.
Yeah.
And, but at the end of the day, it was enough for us to make enough money to get me through the rest of college. So it was a means to an end.
I mean, I saw some statistic yesterday where like if minimum wage jobs in the US had, obviously there's various statistics, this was just one, had grown at the rate of inflation since 1960. Today, it wouldn't be $7.25, it would be $20.50. Sure. But I just love this idea of like the illusion of choice and talking about, how essentially through clever marketing, hippie design, sleek pods and sleek polo necks, we've been sold the illusion of choice. And basically we've just been, we have these monopolies operating at a level that not even pre-antitrust 19th century Vanderbilts were operating. Yeah. And one of the illusions is this idea of being a self-employed or a freelancer, and I think they call it a franchisee.
Yes,
but all it means is you have no rights as a worker. You have no
that's
toilet
right.
breaks,
you don't get if you get injured on the job, it's on you, right? It's like the whole responsibility of the job side isn't you're part of our team and we're going to take care of you. It's this is a freaking rat race and you're a rat and I'm a bigger rat than you. And you better like hustle your ass off so that, and it's
total responsibilization.
wrenching.
Yeah,
totally.
Absolutely. You're no longer responsible just for the productivity of your own job. You're your own manager, which is like a whole other, but it's interesting because like that illusion of self-employment, obviously you see, you have the 2 or 3 successful influencers who can float around and just take YouTube photos and sit on a beach. This is the lie, obviously, of capitalism, that it works for such a tiny minority. And, this is something, talking more politically about, pre-elections in recent years, and identity politics, the rise of identity politics over solidarity and redistribution, ignored in favor of representation. The fact that basically it's so unlikely for you to change your class under capitalism. It's so unlikely for you to succeed, which is the reason, but people would rather be, it's because I'm a woman. That's why I haven't succeeded. That's a simple scapegoating,
Yeah, that's right.
excuse for something that's much more pervasive. And of course, there are problems with racism, like of course there are problems with sexism and all those kinds of things, but and the real core issue is this fantasy world we live in.
Absolutely.
That you buy into, because this lost object of this, I may be made transcendentally happy because I may be this one survivor. But
or you have your selfie shots that you can, I mean, these are becoming more and more therapeutic or cathartic, where if you can take a shot of like a celebrity that you're seeing, and the celebrity's just annoyed as shit, but you're like, hey, here I am, and you're like, you can construct a different fantasy world very easily in a way that doesn't match up with the brutal reality that the rent is due. Your child's going through difficulties with learning disabilities, to drugs. And I mean, the weirdest thing about social media for me is, or one of the weirdest things, is just how easily it is to not be real and to project these kinds of realities that don't exist. But yet everyone wants to see somebody with, like, everybody wants to play the game. And nobody's willing to like talk across these platforms about like the truth of the difficulty of surviving in capitalism, surviving today.
Absolutely. And it's funny because of course there's a sort of release valve or illusory version of this, and capitalism is all about illusion, like illusory emancipation, illusory choice, illusory leftism, illusory radicalism. But the illusion is, this is my honesty post where, I woke up this morning and I felt depressed and stuff. But the one thing that you can't talk about in capitalism is material struggle to survive. Like that's the one thing that will not be the actual crux of it.
Absolutely.
But you could say, I've got a headache, not I'm an alienated subject, or like,
right.
I can't afford this. It's like, I'm a victim because I'm a woman and I'm sad about it. You can say
or
that.
Even like white men are like starting to say, I'm a victim because I'm a white male, because these liberals, these educated liberals, are trying to make me into, make me the enemy or something like this. It's fascinating how this all gets played out. And it's very complicated how it gets played out in terms of identity politics that you mentioned, but also in terms of like race, these very facile differences perceptually. But also, and I think you're totally right about this, like, you can't talk about money. You can't talk about the mode of production as such. It's like the old James Bond films. You go down into, you go down into the Mr. Evil's chambers in the cave under the volcano or something, and you finally get to see the mode of production behind the evil empire that's trying to create but this you get to see the mode of production in that sense, but you don't see the modes of production in everyday suburbia, right? And
absolutely.
And this plays into education. Like, if it turns out, and we've done multiple surveys about this, it turns out that if a student actually gets into uni in the US, they're going to go into debt, but they're happy to do that because them signing the debt note to a bank or to the government or whomever is actually a sign of success. Okay. And it's paradoxical. You're successful if you go into debt. Absolutely. As opposed to no, I'm not going to go into debt at all. So,
it's a really clever marketing ploy. Like, this is the way the shape shifting of capitalism, how it always shifts around this question of the means of production. What was one that was a recent one that I thought, the idea of work. So it's now a status symbol to be busy and to be working at a time, 200, 300 years ago, or even more recently, let's say an upper middle class woman, it would be, you are the really elite because you don't have to work. But now, it is aspiration for wealthy young people to set up a business. And obviously it's an illusion because, they haven't struggled to raise the money, they're only able to work. But, and also, as we have a contracting job market job posts, obviously because of tech, it really is elite to have a job, to be a working person,
Yeah, and you have to demonstrate that you're a worker all the time.
Yeah, all the
And
time.
again,
Yeah.
like you said, like 19th century woman, leisure, that's the birth of the novel,
Yeah.
let's say,
Yeah.
you have the leisure time to read the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays it's like, if you're not at the yoga or doing hot yoga or not doing like some Pilates, some kind of,
Mm-hmm.
thing going on, creating a podcast, like all these
Yeah.
podcasts proliferating,
Absolutely.
it's all playing this game, and
Absolutely. And it's, talking
ridiculous.
about the commodification of education. So it's the commodification of childhood, essentially. Even things like becoming an NCAA athlete, like unpaid hours, et cetera, et cetera. But and all the people who, the sacrifice made by those who don't, quote unquote, make it. But what was I going to say? So even things like self-care. This is where it's interesting, because things that seem radical, obviously, unless they address the key question, they're not radical. They're adopted by capitalism. So when you think of something like self-care, and you hashtag radical self-care, hashtag, I take care of myself, and therefore I'm, this is a way for me to be outside of capitalism. It's like, no, self-care is designed for you to be ready to be a better productive subject.
That's right.
It's like obviously not conducive to capital eventually, and obviously there's always an antagonism that will lead to its demise, as Marx always points out. But we can't have people who can't work anymore because they're all so fucking exhausted.
No shit.
So,
exactly.
But like even the Apple Watch, it's like a way to commodify every single second. How many calories? What's my heart rate? Is it the optimal?
How many paces, steps did I take today?
Exactly.
You have Siri. Like the other day, I was sleeping and Siri came on because I had I like to listen to novels being read out loud as I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's just a stupid quirky thing I have going on. And somehow in the manuscript, it said something that triggered Siri to come on. And so Siri is coming on, may I help you? And then suddenly I'm just like, I literally have this dream. I don't know I don't know if you've ever had a dream where you wake up to an event that's happened, but you've also dreamt about that event as it was happening,
exactly.
something like this, the blended modes. And I was dreaming that I was inside Siri, like I became Siri's brain. And so it was weird to wake up to that whole thing. But you're right. I mean, all these things, keeping our time, really, it used to be the case where you would work enough hours to be able to eat and shelter yourself and ultimately fuck somebody so they could reproduce the race. And that was it. You didn't have that surplus value that you could bank. And, in the end, like, let's face it, most Americans, 4 out of 5 Americans are either at the poverty level or they're one paycheck or 1 month away from poverty. And but you can't talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And this whole articulation of time, and the Baudrillardian and simulacra of like, I can reproduce myself to make myself look successful, is so, I think it's creating these multiple personalities, many personality disorders going on.
Absolutely.
And in a way you can't be, and it's not like we're trying to get back to the romantic Heideggerian view of the self was in the end is a center of its absolute mastery of itself, right? That also is problematic. But so you have these kind of flows going on, and ultimately they're conflicting. And this the watch you were mentioning, all these things that are measuring out how successful we are during that day or not. How many calories did you eat? How many fucking how many goddamn like baguettes did you have? And so on. It's
ridiculous. But it's interesting. There are a couple of things that you mentioned that really sparked something for me. There's the first one just about the Siri thing. Obviously the managerial positions being like sequestered off into this like non-human. Obviously the question how human a manager is when they have a human face, but they still have to basically be obedient to profit. And this is something that's in the film, but there's something about so never being able to mention what the key antagonism is. And the thing that I think is cool about Ken Loach today, like I've not been a fan historically, but there is a sense, and you notice this sometimes in academia with people who are tenured professors and what they're able to say, and the more, you know, by generation proletarianized, like younger people fighting for tenure. And so they can't criticize the corporate structure. And so they'll like sequester their, you know, I don't know, their opinions or what they are able to say into things that actually confirm the condition, which have the appearance of radicality. But Loach, potentially because of his position, and this is, you know, you touched on the idea, okay, we have like a material question, and then there's the more kind of like questions of the unconscious and subjectivity. So like from a material sense, and obviously like I would say like I'm like the dialectical materialist position, but I will obviously like analyze things like from a material perspective. But like he obviously is secure in his position. You know, this movie screened at Cannes, and obviously, you know, when you're within the industry, you can kind of see things that tend to be screened in festivals, etc., that are constitutive to the industry. And there is a real, not necessarily deliberate, but obviously materially speaking, deliberate suppression of anything that touches too closely on the raw wound of surplus value. And Loach does this in this film. You know, he really does it, and because of potentially who he is, / maybe being braver in his older age.
How do you think he does that? Like, in what way do you think he does that? He touches on that surplus value, the wound.
Well, he really points out.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like it's rare. So they talk a lot about like marginalized voices on screen. So fantastic. You know, we have in the past we saw a certain type of person, and of course we can have all these different people on screen. But how marginal is, you know, an upper middle class person? Well, you know, the working class is, you know, marginal, more precarious, more marginal. And, you know, these are white working class people who are often, you know, who really one could say, and I don't even know if you could use the term working class. I feel like a lot of terms are losing their meaning. I mean, do you call working class somebody who is self-employed, precarious Amazon driver? Because working class, you know, denotes some sense of like you have a profession or a trade or an ability to survive paycheck to paycheck.
Like a plumber, electrician, a mechanic. Yeah.
But this movie, you know, he really, I mean, it's so rare today to see in film within you know, a well-funded.
Yeah, it's because we're always it's always sensationalized. The, you know, growing up in the 80s for me, it was like these television programs of wonderful families, the Cosby Show, to these amazing, beautiful, wealthy families, and you live into that fantasy world. And even in Loach's film that we're reviewing a bit here is, you know, there's the whole idea, like if I go into debt to get the van to be able to drive the packages, eventually we're gonna make it to the next level, and we won't have to rent an apartment. We can buy a house. So at the end of the day, the end goal is to buy a house, but that's clearly never going to happen under the normal conditions.
Absolutely. And you get this film really brings to the fore the illusion, essentially. But it's funny because it is like totally bleak. And the ending, obviously, generally in a film, you have a resolution. You either have like, you know, a consolation or a clear tragic incident, or, you know, some proper, you know, I just say proper, that's not the right word, but like some, you know, raised up into some happier place.
Sure.
But, you know, there's nothing. But
your films do something similar, actually.
I know. And this is why I kind of like it. It's like my personal position is, I think that film is an immensely humane and, you know, visceral, universalist medium through which, you know, there's an opportunity to convey a universalism of the lag, which I think is like what is needed in terms of like that. As far as I can tell right now, I don't think that can be commodified upon, and that is like
but I think there is something about your films, this film, but the whole idea of the lack that resists a certain form of commodification. Now, in a way, it's always outside the closure of the symbolic or what can be closed. And that's fascinating. In fact, that gets on to what you're going to be teaching a seminar on the universal lack film, and
Yeah.
that'll be really interesting using McGowan's work and
Yeah.
some of your own film work. That'll be super interesting to
Yeah.
think through. But for me, I'm always wanting like, I desire that resolution, that
Mm-hmm,
sense of
mm-hmm.
like, you're riding that horse, victory is yours. Like, what do you call the gladiator effect?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you ultimately come back and you kill that
Yeah.
which is holding you back.
Yeah. 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 No, exactly. The things I think there's like, not like, obviously I really enjoy movies like that. Movies can be about escapism, enjoyment,
Yeah.
something more, because the funny thing is I almost think like this film was so bleak. And obviously I think Zizek, we mentioned this last week on our episode with Todd, that Zizek talks about like, you can only make a comedy out of the most tragic situations in life, because a tragedy requires somebody to be at least like the ability to have a hero and then have some kind of agency. But I always feel like this, if you actually think about it, this film could be even bleaker than it actually is. Like, what if he had taken the financing of the vehicle? Like, what was it, like $2,000 a month? He could either get his own van at £400 a month or get a company vehicle at $2,000 a month. And but thank God it wasn't that bad. I don't know if
oh my God. But you do bring up a good point about comedy. Like, there was no comedy going on at all. The happiest part of that film was that meal they had. It was a falafel meal with like really spicy food. They were joking around.
Yeah.
And it was actually for me, it was very heartwarming to see that. That felt to me like I could connect with them. I would be, sitting around that table. And there, at that moment, it was a short scene, but it was an important scene. And I think that was the point. That was the point of departure for the tragedy to unfold. Set off against that moment of connection.
Yeah, absolutely. There's almost like a juxtaposition. But that's the thing. I think like film has the ability to show like a solidarity, as in like with both, in terms of like the viewer, so like the kind of metaphysics of how it works, but also within the film, the story itself, how you can kind of like have a communion around shared lack, and then that can be a galvanizing force at some kind of like semi-resolution.
I mean, and maybe that's what all we can expect. It's just those moments of just those really short clips of connection. And this whole idea that everything's got to make sense all the time, and it's all got to be on the up, and we all have to be fucking happy every bit of the day. This is part of the problem. I think psychologically we measure our lives against that sense of happiness, against success, against material wealth, and we're never going to win that game.
Absolutely. There's one last, I know you have to get on. There was this one that made me think of this idea of, Freud's ordinary unhappiness, and how within our society, talking about fantasy a lot, and, self-commodification, and perpetually posting about how wonderfully happy you are on social media. There's a real schizophrenia, or like, I think, I haven't read the book, but I know Darian Leaders talked about like the bipolar nature of contemporary capitalism, because you have this, but then we also have to have this perpetual fire under our feet of like apocalypticism, instead of being able to just like experience like the much more dreary nature of reality, which is kind of like ordinary unhappiness. And talking about like, as we were talking about education, do you completely throw everything out and just say, fuck you, I'm not going to be part of that world, I'm not going to engage in it? Or do you kind of accept the difficulties, the antagonisms, the fact it's not going to be perfect, the fact that there are difficulties, and build something on that kind of rock bottom of ordinary unhappiness,
something like that. And, it's funny as we built GCAS from the ground up, going through years of just hardly any money at all, but and using the graces even of Pete for a time. He and Jack Caputo taught a seminar for us a couple of years ago, right around when Badu taught his seminar. And, it was just like, and you don't want to take advantage of people's intellectual capacities and beautiful insights, but without that early on, there's no way for us, unless you have $1 million. And that's the whole weird paradox of doing education. There's a lot of like freeloaders who want to get into education because they know they can get secured loans from the government through their students. And so, you know, it's a money making machine, like the Trump University.
Absolutely.
This is a money maker. And what we wanted to do is flip that on its head. How can we do education that's debt free? And ultimately that meant, you know, we have to share in ownership together. You know, there's a little communal thing, although I'm not in any way a communist or a Marxist or a socialist or a capitalist. Like I try to avoid those kind of labels, even though that is itself a label. I realize that, but you know, I'm a nihilist, but that's a label that means something. Okay, you can never escape this kind of labeling. But anyway, but I really appreciate your podcast with Adrian. I'm sorry he couldn't get on today, but it's been great to listen to what you're talking about. I really enjoy the cleverness of your insights and your guests and Adrian's work, and it's really great. And
it's been good, actually.
Being on here.
I mean, we are probably like the world's worst like business people, so we just do it when we can, and like we keep trying to say, okay, if you're listening, please give us a review, some kind, even if you don't like it, give us
exactly.
I was like, no, like and subscribe, whatever you say. But it was interesting, you know, that just that question of like labels, you know, and I think that's something you touched upon, like, you know, there's a completely elusive nature to the world we live in as human subjects, and obviously like signifiers and the symbolic is like, you know, something we can cling on to make meaning. But you know, all of these movements, communism, socialism, etc., you know, they can become like a right-wing deviation of the left. You know, as soon as you kind of totally concretize it, you paper over the antagonism, you kind of, instead of bringing the contradiction to the fore. But of course, that's something that, you know, it's funny, you know, capitalism, obviously, like we swim in this sea, we can't see it. Maybe we know it's there, but, you know, really it's papering over antagonism, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, and this whole idea of like labels and capturing, like we are put into a precarity in a way that we always seek, as Freud would commonly refer to, as this security, you know, the protection of the father is what he would call it, but the protection of some kind of strong, secure being, which is where you lead into dictators and so on. And people who are feeling fragile, and let's face it, most of us, if at the end of the day, are fragile beings, we tend to drift to, you know, these labels behind which we feel secure. Like, well, I'm an orthodox Marxist, or I'm a socialist, or I'm XYZ. And, you know, in the end, I think labels, these whole ideas, these ideologies are lazy because they seek security, and it's not game over per se, but it's like the exploration of what a human can become, who you can become. Okay, maybe this is capitalist fantasy. Who are you? But for me at least, I find it boring to hide behind things. Now, sometimes, you know, I used to love being an anarchist Christian when I was going through grad school. John, you know, my advisor Milbank, I'm an anarchist Christian, John Milbank, and he was like, well, you'll come around, young boy. You'll come around to the Anglican way eventually. You know, and you know, I don't know. I maybe it's a luxury not to have to be able to have these labels. I don't know, but
I know. But the thing is, it's like there is a question of like how anti-human labels are, because essentially like humans are because of antagonism, like that's why we're human subjects, because of like the chaos of the universe. And any attempt to obviously, but then what do we have? We have language to communicate with each other. But I know I think the thing is that the question is, it's like just considering the unconscious and considering antagonism as like what we can do. And I guess that's why, you know, I went to kind of like filmmaking over academia, and that like, although I think, you know, academic stuff can be hugely creative, but for me it was like, and also, you know, narrative can be like extremely ideological. So I don't think one is necessarily one than the other, but when I was a bit younger, I thought that perhaps this was more complicated, and you can explore complicated ideas, and you need complication in order to create a work. So
absolutely.
yeah.
But and you know, you don't want to, you don't feel like, I think we're designed to not feel comfortable in contradiction. And yet it's the contradictions, as Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, which reads like a novel. You know, the plot is the spirit, the main character, and you're watching this character like direct from itself and recreate itself through, you know, as it's unfolding throughout history. But you know, these developments of the working through contradictions and being able to, I think, find some kind of not pleasure, maybe enjoyment in the diremptive moment of contradiction. And that's, I think that's what, like, even our conversation today is a kind of play in the enjoyment of of realizing how shitty the world is. But we're able to fucking enjoy this shittiness.
Laugh about it.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
exactly.
That's right.
There we go. We've solved everything. That's
okay, good.
Answer.
End of story. Goodbye. Talk to you. I'll send you a bill for. Anyway, really good to talk to you. Let's keep it going. And I'm looking forward to your class, and it's really been great to chat with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really, really wonderful. Okay, speak soon, Creston.
Ciao, ciao.
Okay, bye.